Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Keystone Policy Center's key conversation on teacher home ownership. I'm looking down at participants. I'm just going to wait a few seconds as people are logging in right now. Just a few logistical things for those of you signing in. You will see that there's a Q&A box here at the bottom, and I will do my best to remind folks to put questions out in the Q&A box. We will do our best to answer those questions in the context of this 1-hour seminar. So again, welcome everyone. I'm Van Scholes. I'm the Senior Policy Director here at the Keystone Policy Center. And I'm excited to have a remarkable crew of panelists here who are experts in education and experts in urban planning and experts in understanding this particular issue around how we can support more teachers to move into a place where they can afford a home and hopefully live out the American dream and be working and supporting kids in their particular communities and in the places where they're working and teaching. So let me introduce our panelists, and then we'll get the conversation going. To my right, I guess, I'll start with our commissioner, Dr. Katie Anthis. She has been at the Colorado Department of Education for a number of years, and our commissioner and helped manage and steer the ship as we've gone through COVID and this long myriad of challenges. Welcome and thank you for joining us here. Just below Dr. Anthis, I have Dr. Jesus Rodriguez, who's an old friend and the current newly appointed superintendent of the Roaring Fork Schools. For those of you that don't know Roaring Fork, it's in the middle of the Colorado Rockies, serves an incredibly diverse student population and stretches from Glenwood Springs, where they have some wonderful hot springs, up to the edge of Aspen. And is also formerly a school principal in Denver and an administrator in Dallas, Texas. And then on the other side of me, on my screen, I've got Dr. Jeff Vinson. He is a professor at UC Berkeley and the co-founder and director of the Center for Cities and Schools at the University of California, Berkeley. And he's done a great deal of research around the relationships between land use, community development, and also educational improvement. And then last but not least, my colleague and old friend, Lisa Birdie, who I'm looking forward to saying doctor soon, but she's the only one that doesn't have a PhD on the on the panel at the moment. Actually, I don't either. So so two of us, and she's a graduate student and researcher at the Pardee Graduate School and RAND. And also a consultant here at Keystone, and she's the main author of our recent report on teacher salaries and home ownership. By the way, if you haven't seen the report, you can go to our website, Keystone Policy Center, to see the report. So let's start out with you, Dr. Anthis. Our Commissioner of Education. There was recently, there was an article in the Colorado Sun a few weeks ago regarding an Eagle superintendent who had sent a letter to families as schools are starting, asking for families considering housing teachers or supporting the school district to find housing for teachers in that school district. I think this is, and I just heard before this conversation that a similar letter went out in California to families from a superintendent. Can you describe a little bit from your perspective what the challenge is? Why is this important to public education and supporting more of our kids to learn at higher levels?
Well, thank you, Van, and I'm honored to be here with these great panelists. I'm not sure what I'm an expert in, because I feel like I'm learning stuff every day, but I appreciate being here. And this is such an important issue. I think it's really heightened in Colorado. The cost of living in Colorado is just continues to grow. And I mean, the reason why it's important is because teachers are and should be an integrated part of the fabric of our communities. They should be able to live where they work. They should be able to build the communities and raise their families, and that just roots them and helps them then coach and facilitate and lead and teach in their schools. And so we don't want a situation where, I mean, you know, heaven forbid, we're busing teachers into different communities because they can't live there. And it's exceptionally hard in Colorado because we have all of these different geographic regions where the Denver metro area is very, very expensive right now. But then we have remote, rural, and remote resort, and probably Jesus kind of bridges both of those things, where you have, you know, what are teachers making? You referenced the Eagle County superintendent, that's the Vail Valley. And it's very, very hard for a teacher or anyone else to live there. So it's absolutely critical to the infrastructure of our public education system. It's critical to the stability of our public education system. And I mean, I think with inflation pressures right now, cost of living, you know, the other report that came out on the wage gap, you know, educators have a lot of preparation and a lot of work to do in higher ed, but yet they don't make nearly as much as what other people make for that same education. So I just feel like we have a lot of gaps to close, and it's going to take a lot of innovative solutions. We were talking before, it's going to take a lot of both and solutions, like we should pay our teachers more, and we need to think of some other solutions. Dan, I think you're on mute again.
Oh, yeah, thanks. Thanks so much for the big picture. Lisa, maybe you could just dive into a little bit about what we found in the report. And I also wanted to just give out a shout out to the Colorado Futures Center, who was our partner in this work. We worked on the teacher salary part at Keystone, and the Colorado Futures Center, some very smart economists at Colorado State University helped with understanding the housing data and what housing was, what the cost of housing was. So Lisa, what did we find out?
Yeah, so thanks so much for hosting this discussion today. I'm also really excited to be in conversation with the folks on this panel. So this study that we did looked at whether housing was valued at an amount that would be affordable to a teacher earning the average salary in the school district in which they worked. So I just want to take a few seconds to talk about exactly what we were looking at. So first, Phyllis Resnick and Jennifer Newcomer at the Colorado Futures Center determined what we called an estimated affordability threshold. And it was the value at which homeownership, so including mortgage payments, property taxes, insurance, and utilities, would not exceed 30% of a teacher's take-home pay within a given school district. We then looked at the number and the share of housing units within the local school district that were valued at an amount that was at or below that threshold. And this was how we determined the extent to which housing was affordable in those communities. Just a note, we looked at affordability, we did not look at availability. So this wasn't about whether or not houses were actually on the market, but whether they were valued at an amount that would be affordable under those sort of criteria. And so here's what we found. In 2021, there were almost 1.9 million non-rental housing units in Colorado, and fewer than 20% of those were valued at an amount that would have been affordable at that price that was equal to or less than that estimated affordability threshold within that given school district. We also know that housing markets are incredibly local, and so we did see differences across the state. Generally, housing was more affordable for teachers in school districts in the San Luis Valley, in Pueblo and the Raton Basin, and on the Eastern Plains. And less housing was affordable in Colorado Springs, Northern Colorado, metro area districts, and mountain area school districts. But within these regions, there's also a lot of variability, ranging from districts where fewer than 3% of homes were affordable at the local teacher salary to communities where nearly 100% of homes were affordable at the local average teacher school district salary. We also looked at this over time. So we looked in 2007, so before the foreclosure crisis, about 38% of homes across the state were valued at an amount that was affordable on the local average school district salary. In 2015, interest rates declined, and over half, about 55% of units were actually affordable to teachers, sort of with the criteria that we had set out. And in 2021, we've heard the headline, we've all experienced it if we were engaging in housing markets in Colorado. Prices dramatically increased, and there was a great decline in the share of units that were affordable. So I think one of the important findings here also is just the impact of interest rates on homeownership affordability. So across the board, homeownership got more accessible as interest rates went down. And I think this is particularly resonant now as the Fed is raising rates and mortgage rates are increasing. We do look at some of the implications for that in our study. We actually find that if mortgage rates were to rise to 6.5%, which is higher than they are today, but they are increasing, we find that prices would really have to drop significantly for homes to be as affordable to teachers now as they were in 2015. Just a quick example, Summit County, where I know a lot of folks on the call are based. For teachers now to afford the same amount, the same share of homes that they were able to in 2015, home values would have to decline by 50% for them to be affordable to teachers at the current school district average salary. And so I think that that's just, it's a dramatic example, but it shows just how challenging some of these affordability challenges can be in communities across the state. So yeah, I think all in all, this study really does shed light both on the challenges that particular communities are facing, as well as some of the variability across the state. And hopefully it whets your appetite just enough to go and look at the maps that our colleague Jason Evans built that show this community by community and over time.
So one of the things that we had wanted to do was we thought it was important to pinpoint exactly how communities vary in terms of affordability and also salaries, and sort of point out how variable things are in Colorado. I suspect that this is also true, and actually I know that it is true in California. While salaries are higher, the cost of housing is even higher in many parts of California. And I was wondering, Jeff, if you might be able to talk about some of the work. You've done some remarkable work on your center at sort of creating a toolbox and doing some work with some school districts around how to address this problem there. So if you might just talk a little bit about your work and what you're learning.
Yeah, happy to do so. Happy to be here. So Jeff Vincent with the Center for Cities and Schools, and we are an applied policy center at University of California, Berkeley. And we're made up of urban planners and educators, education policy researchers, really looking at how you make family-friendly communities. And so we do a lot of different work, but we have a big focus on kind of built environments of schools, school facilities, school campuses, but also of communities. And I think clearly having teachers and a stable workforce is really important for student success, but also for district and school stability. So we in California, of course, everyone knows housing is expensive in California, of course, and we've had districts across the state are really struggling with filling teaching roles, and there's been kind of a on the education side and the education policy community, there's been a real sort of sounding the alarm about a sort of teacher crisis, and just really we're seeing really high turnover rates in teachers in particular. We found in our work the annual average turnover rate of teachers is about 12%. So you've got some districts that are higher than that, and I was really the educators on the line will know how disruptive that is and how expensive and time consuming that is at the district level. But we also have the issue of fewer, younger people entering that profession, and sort of, not enough credentials kind of coming out to fill those. And so, there's a lot of factors that play into that, but clearly the cost of living relative to pay is certainly one of them. And so we have been looking at that issue, and as Van said, like trying to help school districts as well as state policy people think about like what are the different levers to help on this. And so we partnered with our center at Berkeley. We partnered with housing policy folks at the Turner Center for Housing Innovation, which is a research center also here at Berkeley, City Lab at UCLA, which are kind of designers and architects, and the California School Boards Association to do a project. And we have a paper and a handbook that came out for districts. You can find that on our website, but education workforce housing in California, developing the 21st century campus. And so it looks at kind of some of the stats, that Lisa was talking about, and I won't bore you with them. Some of them are really scary, right? In terms of the inaffordability of so many teachers. But we also try to look at other staff, be they food service workers, bus drivers, and others. And, basically you find that, those sort of challenges, affordability challenges, stem sort of across outside the kind of admin level, positions in the districts. But, what we've seen in California is really growing interest in this issue. There's actually already 5 projects or developments that exist. The latest one just opened a couple of months ago here in the Bay Area in Jefferson Union High School. But we, in the last 4 or 5 years, there's been 8 school districts that have put forth bond measures to help pay for this. And we kind of did a scan around the state, and we've gotten a lot. We had about 50 districts respond like, hey, we're really trying to figure this out. But I think, clearly school districts and the executive leadership of the school district, they don't necessarily have training or expertise in kind of land development and thinking strategically in that way about kind of the land that they have. And so what we put together was kind of examples. We looked at the examples that are out there, and then we kind of did some prototyping of campuses and other school lands, and how developments might, play out on those. But I think, from a what's to learn from California perspective for Colorado, I think there's been some interesting state policy changes in California to sort of incentivize, grease the skids, if you will, a little bit to help districts on that, which I'd be happy to talk about. But I think the last thing I'll say on this is like, one of the things that we have done. Well, the thing with school districts and thinking about housing development, the one thing that they do have often is land, right? It's not as if that land is all sitting there fallow and not used. But our opinion was that, there are creative kind of ways to look at some of that land. And so we mapped all the land across the state and kind of what schools were on those lands or were there bus barns or whatnot, and trying to understand the land as an asset. And I think, what we found is that, in certain communities, in certain counties, there's a lot of opportunity. The devil's in the details when you get on the ground, but leveraging land as a financing tool in this, I think, is really, really key. That's why, it takes kind of people with real estate expertise and how to make the financing work, because, penciling out affordable housing is not easy. penciling it out on school district property for school district employees is probably even more complicated, right? So we could talk about that, but I think we're seeing a lot of opportunity here in California and a lot more interest both in communities as well as from school districts, whereas 5 or 6 years ago, people were like, what are you talking about? So now we've got a few developments on the ground, which we're starting to learn from as well.
Great, that's super helpful context. And so pleased that you guys are sort of leading the way on a lot of this work. So maybe if I could go to Jesus and then just sort of talk about, and if you could share what Roaring Fork School District has been doing. You've been engaged, the district has been engaged in this work for a number of years. And a number of the communities, not just for teacher workforce housing, but for housing for all sorts of folks, or for a number of folks that are also essential parts, professionals in the communities that go from Glenwood up through Basalt and Carbondale. Can you talk a little bit about the experience, what you're doing and what you're learning, and also maybe where you might be going with this?
Yeah, good afternoon. Thanks for the invitation to chat with everyone. This is a great question, and one of my catchphrases here is that I'm new here. So as you mentioned earlier, I recently became the superintendent of the Roaring Fork School District, and so I say that here because of course, a lot of the work that is already underway here in our school district is credit to my predecessors, including our team here, staff, our community who have also invested and supported this, and current and previous school boards that had the foresight in 2015 to start addressing this challenge. And they did that by exploring some opportunities via the bond in 2015. And of course, part of the reason that they came up with let's explore house development was because of the cost of living here. And our valley is pretty interesting and unique, where of course the Roaring Fork Valley starts in Aspen, where I saw an article a couple of weeks ago in the Atlantic that the cost of a single family home in Aspen in 2021 was $10 million. And so it starts in Aspen, works its way down Valley to Snowmass Village, and then Basalt, which is part of our school district, and then Carbondale, and then Glenwood Springs, and of course continues to Silt, Newcastle, and Rifle. And I also recently read that in Glenwood Springs, the cost of a single family home in 2021 was $750,000. And so it gets more economical as you work your way down Valley, but it's still out of reach for so many folks who work here in our school district. And so again, our team, our community had the foresight in 2015 to say, we have to address this because it's really hard to recruit talent to the Valley if you don't already have a place to live. And our school district experienced folks who worked here and who left because they could no longer afford to live here, or because they didn't want to commute from 4 Mile to Basalt, which would take them a lot of time each day. We have somebody who used to commute from Grand Junction, which is an hour and a half away from Carbondale every day, and folks, that's hard, and that's a hard ask to make of anyone. And so they had the foresight then to explore the possibility via the bond. And where we are today is that we have 66 units, which is awesome. And of course, not enough. We have over 900 employees who work in the Roaring Fork School District. And so I think also one of the challenges for us is that as educators in various roles, teachers, but as well as, you know, bus drivers and other roles begin to retire. We often backfill their positions with early career folks, and it's really hard for folks to be able to afford to live here. The inventory is very small, so even in terms of what's available to rent is pretty limited. And so 66 units is really great, but also we know that it just makes a very small dent in the need that we have here. And we are currently exploring breaking ground on additional units, but one of the challenges on this side of 2020 is that it's much more expensive to build today than it was in 2015. So it literally costs us double on average per unit, per square foot today than it did in 2015. So we're going to be able to build less units than we did in 2015. It's going to cost us more to do that. And so it's a major complex problem that we're dealing with here. We recently surveyed staff, so all staff, and we got a really large response about the needs that folks have. So we're also trying to think through sort of the life cycle of, you know, working here in our school district. And so we surveyed folks about preferences in the immediacy, as well as what they think or anticipate they may need in terms of space in 5 years, and then also in 10 years. And so we use those data to kind of start project planning for, you know, how many units can we add that are 3-bedroom versus 2-bedroom, or a single bedroom, where you know, a person who lives alone or is single might prefer the 1-bedroom for a long time, and somebody who is in that scenario today, but, you know, expects to perhaps get married or start family, or, you know, adopt or whatever, that might need a little bit more space down the road. Things have also changed for us in the last 7 years here, where I think initially we hoped that staff would be able to pay a really affordable rent, save money, and then be able to purchase a home. And because of the increase in cost of living, it seems still impossible that folks could save enough money to eventually buy a home here in the Valley. As you all know, with the Homeownership, what could teachers afford, the dashboard that you all put together, our share affordable here in the Valley is 7%. And so we're in a tough situation. We're trying to deal with it, and of course do all that we can. I think to Commissioner Anthis' point earlier, everyone who works in our school district deserves to be able to live in our school district. And so we're committed to trying to figure out innovative ways to make that possible.
Great. I want to remind folks, our audience, to please go to the Q&A. We're going to have some time, and we'd like to address questions that come up there. It's currently blank, so come on, folks, throw out some questions.
Hey, Dan, can I just add a couple things just after everyone? So yeah, I just want to kind of reiterate a lot of what Jeff and Jesus were talking about around like how much cost this is, just in terms of the bigger picture of economics of communities and school districts, and then the actual achievement of students. When you have turnover of teachers all the time, and it's such a heavy lift to support teachers in their first couple years, and when a district is having to do that all the time, you know, that actually does impact student outcomes in the end. So it's not just that families deserve this, they absolutely do, and teachers deserve this, and they deserve to be in their communities, but it does have long-term impact. So I think we have a responsibility to explain this long-term impact to our policymakers and to others. I know there's not an easy fix. There's not money trees standing around here. But we do need to figure out ways to support our educators in this work. We have a couple Band-Aid approaches that CDE is not leading, but our friends at the Department of Local Affairs is leading. In the legislature last year, there were probably about 5 different affordable housing bills, because this isn't just an issue for teachers. It's an issue for a lot of workers across our state, that Colorado is just becoming unaffordable for many, 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 many people. And so I do know, just in my connections with the governor's office, that it's going to be one of his, key issues, is making Colorado more affordable in the housing. And I will put in, at least for Van and Keystone, just some of the links to, there's like a revolving loan fund for affordable housing, and state grants and local grants to invest in local affordable housing with local governments. And so you could possibly piece some of these things together with districts to, maybe give people like Jesus a little extra money to build a few more units as they're moving forward. So I'll make sure that those links get out.
Well, I think unfortunately you might go the route of California and have about 500 bills in the legislature in a given session on affordable housing, unfortunately. And there's a handful of them on, teacher or staff housing for school districts. But I think just to, piggyback on a thing that the superintendent talked about, I think you're absolutely right to understand, what your staff or your teachers are interested in. And it does relate to kind of their professional and life kind of trajectories, right? Where they are now, where they want to be. And I think that that's something we've discovered in our work. And what we found in particular is that beginning teachers, we define that here as like 1 to 3 years, were more interested in these kinds of opportunities. And in some ways that made sense, because they tended to be single or not with children or things. So, I think, but that really matters to, like, what are you designing, right? Are you trying to design a bunch of 1 bedrooms? Or are you trying to design a bunch of 3 bedrooms or some mix? And I think one of the tools that we created was a survey that a school district used, and we're making it available to other districts to adapt it, to basically survey their teachers and their other staff about what is their housing situation? What are they, ideally, what would they want, or where do they see themselves in 5 years? But I think you really nailed it. I think that's a really important step in planning for such a development.
Great, thanks you all. We're getting some questions, maybe, we're sort of moving into the away from the problem identification of this into sort of solutions discussion and examples of those things. One of the things that I sometimes hear from folks, and I actually was one of these folks a decade ago when having conversations with some friends around it, when saying, well, why don't we just pay teachers a lot more? Wouldn't that solve for some of this problems? And just curious, sort of, if we could just sort of popcorn around, thoughts around that.
I would say not just paying teachers more, but we definitely do need to pay teachers more. So here in our valley in particular, paying teachers more definitely would help, I think, with their quality of life, but still be so huge between what's affordable here in the valley. And so I think that paying teachers more is like a non-negotiable. We definitely need to do that. And also, I think we need to do more, right? So whether that is, for example, in our valley, and I think across the state, I think it would be great for folks who have already in-state tuition and who attend a public Colorado university to have the opportunity for a tuition scale or reimbursement, loan forgiveness, etc., that I think in some places is easier to accomplish. We have pretty diverse by design school boundaries in our school district that capture the diversity of our community. And I think there's benefits to that. One of the things that folks may not always benefit from, if you're a teacher, that you don't qualify for some of the loan forgiveness because of the diversity of socioeconomics here. And so I think we need to do more to help and support teachers in that way, right? So not only paying them more, but also, ensuring that they don't have to be, in debt, paying high interest rates for doing this really important work of teaching. I think you had started earlier talking about, I think you asked the commissioner the question about the story in the Colorado Sun about the superintendent in Eagle County that I also think that locally, folks who have property here should have priorities for public servants like teachers in particular. And I think that would help a great deal. I think other things like interest rates, right? So again, if you pay teachers more here, that's going to be grand because interest rates are through the roof and cost of living is through the roof. They still can't afford to buy a house here. And so, yes, big fan of pay teachers more, and that we need to do so much more than just that.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. It's a both and situation, and it's a systemic situation, right? So that's also why I think it's really important that, like, the statewide we're looking at it, because and it looks really different in different communities, as Lisa and the map shows, and the solutions are going to be really different based on those communities too. So I think some state programs that can partner with local governments and districts might help. And then to Jesus's point, I mean, we need to start thinking creatively too about, we learned through the pandemic, we knew this before, but it was just brought home to us that teachers are essential workers. We have lots of other essential workers too, but teachers are absolutely essential. And we should give them some benefits for doing this really critical work that they do, the most important work in the world, I would contend. And so give them, benefits. I'm not a finance expert, so I'm probably saying things that are crazy, but like, give them, pay part of their home loan, pay part of their down payment, give them different interest rates or something. Like we always do for airlines, military personnel can go first. Let's do some of that for teachers. Teachers should be able to go first and do some of this.
Great, thanks. It seems that, at least in all of the conversations that I've had, that it's an and. It's that we do need to figure out how to address, for instance, school finance. We do and make changes in Colorado. We also need to pay our teachers more. And we also need to figure out what to do about this housing challenge. I think your point, Commissioner, around interest rates and access to money and mortgages are critical. In Washington, D.C., there was just a recently policy that was adopted by the city that provides for zero interest loans for city workers as well as teachers. It's part of as a down payment for homeownership. I think it goes up to $30,000, maybe $40,000. So it's a small percentage given the cost of housing in Washington, D.C., but certainly that's a huge help. Could we actually, if we could just touch on that, if anybody else has any comments around access to money in terms of home ownership, if Jeff or Lisa or anybody else have any comments or examples of that.
Sure. So, Dr. Anthis, I think that you're not crazy in terms of the ideas that you're throwing out, and some of those programs do exist. I think not currently for educators. And I think that this idea around there are multiple points at which we can intervene and provide relief to teachers and facilitate homeownership. So some of it might be at loan origination, some of it might be later to alleviate some of the pressures of interest rates that folks might be under. Some of it could be debt relief that would, forgive portions of the mortgage dependent upon service to the community. A lot of those do exist, but they tend to be smaller programs so far. And I think that we don't see them in the space for educators quite as much. I think, there have been communities that have really been committed to increasing salaries for teachers. And I think that that is incredibly promising to see. I do think that it starts to address some components of the cost of living, but I think what we find is that housing is really a unique beast, and that the costs associated with housing are just outstripping any work that is being done in sort of addressing some of that through wage increases. And that is certainly felt in the education space and also felt by our families as well, who are experiencing this.
Maybe if we could go to Jeff in Berkeley to talk a little bit about sort of how policymakers in California are trying to address some of this and where there may be examples of things for us, those of us in Colorado, to think about.
Yeah, just on the topic you guys were just discussing about sort of mortgage assistance or down payment assistance, we've definitely seen school districts have those kind of initiatives or programs. San Francisco Unified School District has long had one. But again, I think to Lisa's point, it's, how do you fund those and whatnot? So there would be examples of how those can be structured here. I'm not an expert on them, but I've often been asked sort of, well, maybe we should do more of that instead of build this housing. And again, I think, why not a both and, right? If you can sort of figure out how to fund that. But in terms of, what has California done on the housing development side? I mean, I was sort of cringing listening to Jesus's description of the inflation in building. And I mean, we're seeing that here too. It's just really astronomical. But what California has done from a policy perspective, I would flag two things I think that would be instructive for Colorado, perhaps. The first is that we passed, well, in our report, we list all the legislation on this issue that has been put forth. Much of it actually hasn't passed, but a handful of them have. The kind of first big one was the Teacher Housing Act of 2016. And this did two things in our opinion. The first is that it was the legislature making a statement that teacher stability as well as kind of quality is important for student success and school quality. Like it sort of made that assertion. And then secondly, probably, more nuts and boltsy is that, and how do you pay for this, is that it enabled California school districts to be eligible for low-income housing tax credits to help pay for housing developments, right? And so LIHTC or low-income housing tax credits are a main source of financing affordable housing. It's not a huge slush fund. They are competitive and they are limited, but it enabled school districts to potentially access that financing in their capital stack of the different sources of funds that will pay for it, whether that's bonds, that's LIHTC, et cetera. So that was big, and school districts are looking to use that. And that in the affordable housing world, that's a huge lever. So that was a big change. The second one is more recent, which is made its way through the legislature, and I think the governor is about to sign it. I don't believe that he has yet, but Assembly Bill 2295, I think is the number. But essentially what it does is, one of our main recommendations in our research was that school districts there needs to be some increase in the land use flexibility that schools have so they can design and plan. And so one of the things that this bill does, kind of the main thing, is that it sort of gives a little bit of design and development certainty to school districts. It basically says that regardless of where, any school land is, if it's an R1, R2, whatever the zoning is there, is that they could actually develop a minimum of 3 stories on that property. And so that actually sort of, from a how do you pencil these projects out, you kind of have to have more units and a little more density often to get them to pencil out. And that relates to the financing tools, et cetera. but this kind of gives an added, because we have a lot of, in certain areas, in certain neighborhoods, we have a lot of opposition to any development, and especially any development with any kind of density beyond one floor. So in my opinion, in our opinion, that is a step in the right direction in terms of giving school districts some kind of design and planning certainty. So if folks want to look at that, as Assembly Bill 2295, still in the legislature, but making its way forward.
What else, maybe if we could focus a little bit more on, it was mentioned earlier that districts have this great advantage that they're often one of the largest landholders in a community, and that there often are pieces of land that are maybe better used or could be in some ways have multi-use, which would include housing. And I was just wondering, maybe Jeff or others, if you could weigh in on how that's helpful, and also using that land in some ways to leverage more funding to sort of provide housing, and or partnering with developers of one kind or another, not for profit or others, to support the development of those housing. So how can folks use the land that they already have?
I can give a little bit of context about how we've used the land that we already own. And I'll also answer, I think, a couple of the questions that I saw in the chat related. So I saw a few folks asked about the units in the Roaring Fork School District, rental versus purchase. So the 66 units that we currently own are for rental only, but I actually did not mention to you all 14 units that we don't own, but that we help to develop, that 14 families of Roaring Fork School District employees do own. So we had this land adjacent to one of our high schools, and we partnered with Pitkin County to develop the land. So we in-kinded the land, and then Pitkin County contributed the money for infrastructure and the actual development. And those units, there's 27 of them, 14 were reserved for us on the school district side. At that time, the land was valued higher than the cost to build. And then Pitkin County employees had 13 of those. Those homes are they're for purchase. So the families who live there own them. Of course, there's some conditions there, which they have to be an employee either for the R14 units of the Roaring Fork School District. Of course, the same in county, but that's one of the ways that we have also, I think, innovatively thought about, solving for the crisis of cost of living out here, and also I think speaks a little bit to the land development. My office is Carbondale, and we are co-located in the former Carbondale Middle School, and we are co-located with one of our high schools, Bridges High School. So they're right next door to us. But out here, you can't see it from this angle. On district land, we developed a good chunk of units. I think there's 20 units out here that are multifamily, and they're, again, just right outside the window here. The land that we expect to develop or to break ground on in the next phase of expanding our housing program here is also on land that's adjacent to one of our high schools. And so I think those are some of the ways that we've tried to do that. I'll switch over. I saw there's a question about the salary of a first-year bachelor prepared teacher. For us, we range in the top 99th percentile of comparable school districts, and we pay a stipend to average that out to $50,000 for a first-year teacher with a BA here in our school district. answered the question here, but all of the units, the 66, are multifamily on district property for the most part, other than a developer who was working on some units, and they have had to provide affordable housing as part of the development deal that they made, partnered with us. And so we sort of purchased those that were already in development. So those are not on school district property. And then the rent for a 1-bedroom unit and for any of our units are on a sliding scale. And so it depends on the average household income cutoff for the family. And so for a 1-bedroom, it's as low as $810 right now. And that's, of course, significantly below market. There's an ADU unit right behind the house that I rent in Glenwood Springs right now that I know goes for $1,400.
Great. That's super helpful contextually. Also wanted to mention that there is a ballot initiative making Colorado affordable, which would set aside, I think it's about $270 million into existing structures that may be able to support and address some of these issues and challenges. What else? Maybe we also had a question about construction costs, and I don't know if there's a way to sort of build in or control for some of these things. But just if anybody has any comments about that, because I know that that's it's, you know, that after 2015, I know that the construction sector, after the last recession, it dropped, and we're still in Colorado trying to build up that sector. So in many places, even if there is money available, there may not be folks who are available to build. And how do we do that in places that maybe sort of rural communities or other places where there maybe aren't the same incentives that there may be in, let's say, the Denver metro area? And just wondering if anybody has any comments on that, on any of those.
Well, I think it's similar to school construction and modernization, right? You want to make hay when it rains. You want to be ready to do all that work when it's cheaper, right? But we're not always able to time that, particularly when the state puts out grants for different things that actually sometimes drives costs up on that. But I think, I mean, yeah, I don't know, that's a difficult question, that construction cost question. I mean, I think that, you know, getting back to your previous question, which is related, which is how do you kind of use the land and whatnot? I mean, you know, when you look at the costs to develop, and particularly to develop affordable housing, I mean, one of the big chunks of that cost overall is the land itself. So what a school district, assuming it, you know, if it's bringing land to the table that it already owns, right? I mean, you're taking, you know, that's a big value, right? You're taking a big cost off of that ledger, which is huge, right? And so it does help lower the overall cost. But I think that in terms of moving it forward, I mean, what we've seen here is some interesting collaborations with school districts and affordable housing developers, of which we have quite a lot here in California. And I would imagine those entities, often nonprofits, exist in Colorado. And I think that, you know, what would be great is if Colorado, whether it's Department of Education, whether it's Keystone or some other entity, kind of brings interested school districts and nonprofit developers together to learn how to, you know, where there's less of a, you know, I don't know, there's more like info sharing, and you know, when you're looking at the land, you've got to, you know, affordable housing developers know how to look at, you know, where's it better to develop, or what factors with the site are more competitive for funding, are going to be less costly on the construction side because of slope or whatnot, right? I mean, all of these things. So, you know, those are things that a school district superintendent shouldn't have to know, right? And so I think there's a real opportunity there. I mean, one of the things that we're doing is kind of doing a little academy over the next 10 to 12 months with 4 or 5 school districts and our partners on this research to kind of handhold some school districts through kind of moving this forward, like a preliminary development phase. Like, should we move forward on this? Do we think we can put together the financing? Do we think we have some properties or a property that would work? And we're trying to learn from that to then take it to scale, because I think just getting off the ground is really difficult for districts. So if an entity like Keystone or the Department of Ed or someone of that nature can kind of help, I think, bring folks together in that way, and maybe private sector consultants as well do real estate development. But I think you need some sort of a safe space to kind of do that, and a facilitator of some sort might be beneficial at a larger scale, as opposed to each school district trying to like figure out a partner to work on, or work with.
Great, thank you so much. We're coming up on the hour, and I just wanted to ask if folks have any final thoughts, short thoughts, before we close out. And I will say that this is what I hope is a start of a conversation. We did this because we wanted to identify this as a problem, and how unique the problems and how the problem varies across the state. We at Keystone, and I'm sure our partners, are very interested in trying to sort of facilitate and support conversations around solutions going forward. So I'll just say that on the outset. So any thoughts, Commissioner? Or
I would just say it's really important. It's so core to the education mission and our mission of developing communities and families. And it might be it probably is a good time, because I do know our governor, assuming he gets elected for the second term, wants to make housing a very big priority for his upcoming term.
any thoughts, Lisa or Jesus?
No, again, I just thank you for bringing attention to this conversation. It's a need across our state, and it's helpful to I think have the conversation widespread and with a lot of different partners, because again, I don't think we can't solve it on our own as a school district, right? I recently saw too in Aspen, community member, philanthropist, owner of some properties out there, sold for, again, significantly below market rate, some units to the Aspen School District. That that's the kind of thing that it's going to take here as well. So and across the state. So thank you for bringing attention to this challenge.
Yeah, I really think that it's a community challenge and a community opportunity. And I think that it also aligns with some other important priorities in the state, particularly around diversifying the teaching workforce. I think that providing this opportunity to folks who do not have family resources with which to rely on to access housing is incredibly important to make sure that teachers are representative of kids in classrooms. And I think that that's another part of this conversation around who is actually targeted by these programs that's worth the discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Lisa, for bringing that up. We know that the workforce in Colorado, I think it's also true in California, is not in any way representative of the students that many of our school districts are serving. And we also know that home ownership is that much harder for low-income folks and for Black and Latinx folks and many others that for a variety of structural reasons have been shut out of those economic opportunities. So we would hope that, and we are looking forward to having more conversations and hopefully supporting those of you that are doing work on these issues. Thank you so much for our amazing panelists, and thank you all of our participants for joining us here, and we'll stay in touch on next steps. Have a great afternoon.